Welcome to another episode of Israel in Asia. So, this is the Philippines part 2, the Isles of Sinim. If you go back to a previous video, when I say the Southeast Asia is in the Bible, which is the Isles of Sinim, this one is specifically focused on the Philippines as one of those Isles of Sinim. A lot of my material is very duplicated, just is shaped in different formats. So yes, a lot of my material is not too new until I find new material. Now I did find new material for this presentation. However, everything else is regurgitated to get you from a different angle to make sure that the material is received properly, as well as you see that there's a pattern there. The information doesn't really change, because history doesn't change, because history's already been written. But however, understanding has to change. So let's go and look at some of the understanding in the history that we have. Now, if you already watched the Southeast Asia, the Isles of Sinim slide or presentation, you will know that Isaiah 49 is talking to the Isles, which is Israelites scattered into the Isles of Sinim, which is the southeast of Sinim. If you look at the last verse in verse 11, we're talking, it says, "And I will make all my mountains a way, and my highways shall be exalted. Behold, these shall come from afar, and lo, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim." If you remember and you watched that presentation, I broke it down properly. If anybody could please come back to confirm whether I was interpreting this wrong, let me know. However, that hasn't happened, so it must means that my information might be on point. So let's continue. So the Isles of Sinim is modern day China. Now in the same presentation, we talked about Kafi. Kafi is right next door to the Isles of Sinim. Kafi is right next door to Sinim, which is also in China. Now, based on another presentation that I watched, so I did pull this material from someone else's presentation, but they just happen to have a document talking about the Filipino Jewish roots. So let's read this information and confirm even more that the Philippines is definitely one of those Isles of Sinim. It was believed that in the ancient times, one of the Semitic tribes settled in the Philippines. How do we know that? During the assimilation period of the 10 tribes, one of the tribes of the sons of Israel reached to the islands and settled there. So they know one of the tribes. Do we know which one? Not sure, but they know somebody did. Because one, first of all, the prophecies proven that they will go there. Now, having traveled decades, evading persecution. Persecution of what? Spanish Inquisition. Persecution of the Jews. They were invaded because the Spanish Inquisition is the only Holocaust that ever happened. The Spanish Inquisition is the only Holocaust that ever happened. And I'm going to say that with affirmation. The Spanish Inquisition is the only and official Holocaust that ever happened. There was no other Holocaust, and it was all made up. It's a book that tells you this. But let's continue. Having traveled for decades, evading persecution from one place to another place, the real Jews, they reached Kafi in Shanghai in southern China. Finally, they ventured into neighborhood islands where they reached the Philippines before the Spanish came and conquered them and colonized them and enslaved them. And of course, the Portuguese came in prior to make sure they enslaved them and shipped them from island to island. Also, that's also how some of them got to the Philippines, but we'll show that later. When the Spanish discovered the Philippines, they were amazed at the circumcision practices by the natives, and these were probably remnants of the 10 tribes. Thus, they still imposed the power of the Inquisition, the real Holocaust, in every new land they were colonized to ensure that no other religion will be preached in their colonies. The result of these persecutions did by the did by the power of in the old world was the fear of the lives of the Israelite remnant and the Merinos, who in turn for centuries persecuted, became unfamiliar with the Jewish traditions because they couldn't practice them or they was trying not to practice them. For centuries, the crypto Jews, conversos, and the Merinos, the so-called new Christians, had lived assimilated into Christian worlds after the expulsion of Jews in Mosul from Spain in the 1600s. So bottom line is, it is 100% confirmed that those Isles of Sinim, and one of those Isles of Sinim that was southeast of Kafi, which is right next door to Sinim, was the Philippines, and they assimilated there and they hid there and became crypto Jews to evade and avoid persecution. Now, this information is confirming that those people were there through escaping. Meaning these Israelites were there, and many people, if you read the Asian slaves of colonial Mexico, many of these Jews were shipped to Mexico. These Jews were shipped to Mexico. Now, the Jews that were there was Nestorians, and they created the Nestorian Christianity, possibly the Nestorian Christianity, in the fact of trying to practice some of their religions and to be followers of their Christ per se. But the Jews also have been in China for many years, and many of them heard that the Messiah had already came. They were much excited at the intelligence, it is said, and marveled greatly, but would not believe it because they weren't in Jerusalem when it happened. So please get a clue. Jews were in Israel, but now we're talking about the ones that escaped there. Let's talk about the other people and the other Israelites that made it to the Philippines. Now, let's deal with this other issue. On one of the comments in my previous presentation, they mentioned, a gentleman or someone mentioned that, oh, yes, the Philippines is the land of Israel. In what world does that exist? Doesn't make sense. You're following the doctrine of the land of Orph or the land of the land of Tarsha. I've seen those videos. It's very, very far off. Yes, great history, great information to confirm that the seed of Tarsha did migrate and make it into the land of Philippines. The Philippines is the seed of Japheth. They used to control the European lands. Those people did get forced by Esau and displaced into the islands of the Philippines. Yes, they did go there. Yes, Ophir was there, and that probably is one of the locations where the people went to receive the gold for the King Solomon in the Old Testament. That is absolutely correct, as into the point of where or origin they probably went. However, saying that because of that information that was provided and you confirmed that makes the people in the Philippines Israelites, absolutely wrong doctrine. That does not make them the Israelites. That just say that the seed of Japheth is there along with the Israelites. The book I just highlighted identifies and say those people did migrate to the Philippines along with the seed of Japheth, assimilated throughout the world. But what makes someone an Israelite in the Philippines? Now here's your nationality chart. If you can see, those people of Tarsha were other Spanish people, the original Spain people that used to be in the land of Spain that migrated into the Philippines. We're not talking about the Edomite Spanish people. But I wanted to deal with that because I don't want people to keep watching these videos and confuse it with, oh, the land of Tarsha, the land of Ophir. Many of you guys have watched these videos, and I know you think that's why the topic I'm hitting. That is absolutely false doctrine. False doctrine. Now, Because of that false doctrine, look at your own map. Have you noticed that it has Gentiles highlighted on the map from the Edomite Spains, identifying that they knew that some of these people were not Israelites? And they identified Gentiles in different arenas. Or they were calling them Gentiles because they didn't know. Why would they have Gentiles on the map for you to say this is the land of Israel? No, it's named after King Philip. It's just the land of Philippines that got people scattered abroad from the seed of Japhet as well from the seed of Israel. That's it. Now let's deal with the Israelites. Get back to the Israelites. Now, this is a book, the Dutch and the Spanish monarchy, and the Jews. So once again, we know there's a multiple diagrams. That's why the Philippines looks so different, as well as the shade of darkness and lightness throughout the Philippines, because there was a lot of intermingle. But to confirm, where did these people go? Let's look at the paragraph on 328. It says, but if it is granted that the more predominant sectors in the 17th century Mexico's were Jewish, and that the Jewish sectors of the Portuguese population in Mexico. So let's look at that. Portuguese Jews. The Jews were in Portuguese, but they're talking about a Portuguese population in Mexico had few remain links to Portugal. Meaning why? Because they left. Those are the real Jews they're talking about right now. The question arises as to how far this group was in fact consciously in Portuguese. How were they consciously Portuguese? Did they know their Jewish roots still? How in fact were they tied to their Jewish roots? Like most other Spanish in his time tended to see the Portuguese Jews and the non-Jews as being both deeply committed to the cause of the Portuguese restoration and militant Portuguese nationalization. Spanish Inquisitions had long been suggested that both kinds of Portuguese, and then we got it translated, were prone to cooperate, especially at the expense of the Spaniards. Meaning they was going to cooperate and assimilate and hide out to the Spanish because they know they didn't want to get persecuted anymore. So the Spanish Inquisition, the Mexico Inquisition, the Filipino Inquisition, all these inquisitions were looking for Jews among the Japhites and the Moabs and the Ammonite seeds throughout all the world. That's what makes a person Israel, because they were practicing and keeping the commandments, and they knew of who they were historically, and they ultimately forgot who they were because they was tired of being persecuted. Those are the Israelites that now are simulated entirely, that do not know who they are. As the Bible say, they will not know who they are in the land that they will be. So realize Israelites are a people that do not know who they are, that fell off because they broke God's law, and now we're trying to get you to understand, get back to the commandments, keep God's law to protect yourself and identify yourself as who you really are and not a Filipino. Just proof from books that there were Jews in the Philippines prior to even the Spanish coming there. I read this in one of my previous presentations, but this is just proof. Jews were there. Now, as I mentioned, if you read the Asian slaves of colonial Mexico, you realize most of these Jews got shipped into Mexico. If you go back to the last page I just showed you, those Jews were in that book was highlighting that there was the same relatives that were in Mexico were also in the Philippines, and they were related. They were both Israel, just in different lands, because they was transported back and forth from between the two lands. But let's say the Jews that made it and migrated, integrated into the Philippines were actually sold into Mexico. That means all of them left, right? Absolutely wrong. Why? because a lot of them were assimilated and they was able to hide out as Morinos, the Portuguese Morinos. This is about a Portuguese Morino that was an explorer. As he was in the country, in the land, he identified the Moros, or the Moors, which is just another word for black, were very closely knit. Their complexion, their identity was very closely knit with either the heathen or the Moors, they said, right? And it says, or the latter was rooted out, meaning that the latter, Moors, was rooted out. Why would they say Moors, but they didn't say Israel? Why? Because they was assimilating. They was trying to avoid persecution. But if you look at the bottom note, it says the Moros, or the Muslim men, were far from being rooted out. Why would they say that's far from being rooted out? And he says that they were warring with the Spaniards from the day of our for details. Okay, good. I'm sorry. This is either he was deceived or he was afraid to publish the truth. The truth about what? So why would he have an issue about publishing the truth about them being Moors or Muslim? No, he was afraid to expose the truth about them being Israel, because they hid each other's identity. Let's prove that. So, Anisim, the disperse of Anisims, the Sephardic Jews, the Crypto Jews, and the Morenos spread to France, Italy, Mexico, America, where there are many thousands of them that are there or original secret Jews today. Anisims even reached as far as the Philippines, Macau, which most of the majority slave trade came from Macau to the Philippines, and into Brazil, the Amazon region. They used to say, we come from Spain. You just read that. We just heard that. They come from Spain, but they're not Spanish. They come from Spain, but they were not Spanish. They come from Portugal, but they were not, they're not really Portuguese. Prophecies in the Bible say over and over again in 1 Maccabees 1:53, and it drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for secret or for succor. 2 Maccabees 6:6. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep the Sabbath day or ancient feast days, or to profess that he was even a Jew. So they came up with different names, Morenos, or Nisam, or new Christians. They were Christians. They developed new identities to hide themselves. And whoso would not confess themselves in the matter of the Gentiles that was in that land should be put to death, and then might a man have seen the present misery, meaning that if they don't assimilate, they will see misery. And bottom line, Deuteronomy 28:64, it says, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth to the other. So Israel is definitely in the Philippines based on the bloodline and characteristics of them and the practice of their commandments. Has nothing to do with the landmass. It's the people. Because if you want to say it's the landmass, let's just take it from this. The Philippines was not just in the Philippines. It just happened to be in Cuba and in Mexico, where there are other tribes at. They shift them all around the world and decide to say, okay, I conquered this. King Philip conquered this land and that land, and I'm going to ship this cattle and that cattle from there on these ships as slaves. So if you want to say it's the land of Israel, it's absolutely wrong. However, are we confirming that Filipinos did have Israelites there in the beginning? Yes. Now let's continue. In fact, they also meet the prophecies of those that was in Macau, those that were in Japan, those that were in Korea, those that were in Mongolia, that actually became captives of war or captives of the Spanish Inquisition, because it wasn't just a Filipino Inquisition. You had Inquisitions that went around the world, persecuting, identifying, and secretly spying on Israelites and Jews to confirm and see whether they was keeping the Sabbath, whether they was doing any of these things. Because if they were, they put them in. They captured them and they stole them. And in fact, they killed the parents, stole the kids, and sold them. Deuteronomy 28:68. It says, "And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again in ships, by way there whereof I speak unto thee. Thou shalt see it no more again, and there shall be sold unto your enemies as for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you." Now, please realize, not only did Spain go into the Philippines and Southeast Asia, the Portuguese set up a massive trade route within the Silk Road, as well as throughout all the seas of Southeast Asia, to establish not only a market, but the slave trade. And they constantly, I haven't finished the book, but they constantly stole slaves throughout the whole land of Asia. They was raping women, stealing women, kill the man, take the children and women. Constantly throughout for years on this side of the world. And they are putting it in books now. So those Israelites that made it into Philippines probably did get sold into Mexico. But there were other Israelites in China, Korea, and Japan, and they were sold into the Philippines. So where one Israelite tribe got moved, shifted out, another Israelite group got shifted in. So for those that say, oh, they all got pulled out of the Philippines, that is absolutely incorrect and stupid and incorrect history. So if you do some research, you will find out slave trade happened predominantly in the Southeast Asia Sea, especially in the Philippines, whether they were shipped out of the Philippines or shipped into the Philippines. But the Philippines was the main slave market in Southeast Asia, as well as Macau in China. But guess what? Would they be selling them to Macau? Not really. They were pulling them out of Macau. Moab was getting them out of there. And here's just some proof. This is these slides, not new at all. I did say it earlier in the presentation. I'm just regurgitating information. But you will see, and you should see, that the prophecies of Isaiah 49, the books are confirming the location, the history lines up, the Israelites were in the Isles of Sinim, which especially one of those isles was considered the Philippines. Once again, please acknowledge your offense. Seek God's face early through your affliction. I know you're going to read these books. That's great. But realize, hear this conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment and every secret thing. So those that believe and hear this, know you need to go back to the commandments. Learn how to keep the commandments. Not just hear the history. That's great. I'm glad you want to hear this information because you do know the history. Because most people, and I'm being generalized, but most people in Asia are afraid to know their history and to deal with some truth and facts, just like the southern tribe. But most of the northern tribe is even worse. They don't want to hear this stuff. They just want to live their life and say, let's just kumbaya. Keep thinking that, because you're going to keep getting knocked over the head and suppressed and gaslit, and your currency is going to be continue to suppress. They're going to extort your environment, your economy, use you, try to take your women, impregnate them, make them only because they want them just to be their concubines or something like that. Have fun with that. Realize you need to stick with your own Israelite seed, because what you're doing is you're screwing your own seed. But bottom line is, realize the Philippines is obviously and easily has a large remnant of Israelites in that land. Make sure you come back to the truth. Don't fall for the lies and deceptions of Caesar Borgia, the Israelites. If you see the cover of this book, look who's on the front cover. It ain't you guys. And I just showed you who the Jews were.